All right.
Welcome back.
Welcome everyone to part number two. Wolfgang, you're frozen. I hope that will
Yeah, you
resolve
are
itself in
frozen
the
too.
next couple of seconds. So in this part two, no, it looks good. So in this part two, we're going to talk, or rather, Wolfgang is going to talk about the execution. We've talked a lot about the why would you want to have a myth and what do you do to create one? What are some of the important ingredients? Now we're going to talk about how is it being executed. A lot of it is through communication, other manifestations also of the brand. And as you'll see, things like style matter, the choice of media matters, and the message being the medium is an interesting aspect that I know Wolfgang is going to talk about. And then at the end, we kind of go full circle back to the myth. And Wolfgang is going to show how the myth really helps guide, is a guide rail to the execution across all touch points, to use that very fashionable word in marketing. So with that, Wolfgang, it's back to you.
I'll
And
share
word.
my screen in a nanosecond. There you go. You should be seeing everything clearly now. Part two, it says Ueber-Brand communication. That's what we're going to talk about. Ueber-Brands and how they communicate their mythical story. The first thing that's important to note is the golden rule of Ueber-Brands is that they need to balance inclusion and exclusion in everything you do. What does that mean? Well, versus traditional mass marketing brands, which want to accrue as many people as possible and get an awareness, ideally at 100% and a love at 100%. For Uber-Brands, it's a little bit more tricky because they need to still remain special and aspirational while being as widely distributed as possible, because obviously they also still want to make money. So you need to tread a little bit more carefully and a little bit more mindfully, not just like going all out and being lovely to everybody and being including everybody. But you can't be following the traditional ideas of exclusiveness either anymore, because they've become too, again, too crude, too passé. People know them. They're so obvious what you're trying to do, and they backfire because people have become too savvy. So you need to find more modern ways of balancing, besides, by the way, the traditional idea of exclusivity doesn't work anymore with the internet, where every whatever Supreme or every Louis Vuitton is just a click away for everybody anywhere. So there's no control that you can exercise to the scarcity or rarity of your brand anymore. But so you need to find ways where you balance, or new ways where you find in which you remain exclusive or remain a little bit out of touch, a little bit distant, so that they're still aspirational while mildly engaging with your targets at the same time. You'll see here one way that people do that, or one example of who does that quite well, is Net-a-Porter, or Mr. Porter, who has really tiered their clients, their targets, and in a way that you are very much aware how a higher standing. So if you spend more money, if you become a VIP client, what bonuses that will give you, but still enabling you to kind of live up to that and become part of that. And they really mitigate this quite well. But what they also are is an example for the best way to achieve or to balance this idea of inclusion and exclusion, which is not just talking about you or praising yourself, claiming kind of stuff, but really more becoming the medium yourself, engaging with people that you do, which is the first part that we're going to talk about, brands as media. Then, as JP already said, we're going to talk about style, because style is very, very important. The how is key when it comes to Uber-Brands, as we'll see. versus traditional mass market brands, where it usually was about what you say, because you were claiming like 99% purity or 100% whiter or whatever it was. You had a factual claim that would ideally give you, differentiate you. Here, it's often just the style that differentiates you. And then lastly, we're going to wrap it all up and see how it all hangs together and how important it is that it does connect and hang together. Brands as media, one example was Net-a-Porter or Mr. Porter already. There's another one that a brand, King Arthur's, a much smaller brand, much more mundane brand also. It's not about high-end fashion, but it's about flour. Expensive flour, but still flour. You know, how expensive can flour be? But it became the king of Corona, because yes, all flours were doing well, because everybody was baking, including myself. I just made the Christmas cookies, but for the first time since, I don't know, 30, like I think the last time was when I did it with my mother. And so everybody was baking, so it's not a surprise that flour was selling out everywhere. But King Arthur was doing particularly well, not the least because they really turned themselves into a go-to for inspiration, for support, for help when it comes to baking. So they really created a little hub of, they have the isolation baking show that you see here, or they have like Mission Impossible, like how they like gave you tips on how to bake or what you can do. They had little webinars and stuff. So it's really amazing, the kind of content. Traditionally you would just talk about content, which is such a dismissive way of looking at it, because it is not just about, again, stuff. Remember, like in the beginning of the first part, we were talking about all that matter in the stores, that soulless stuff that's hanging around there that nobody wants. Same way, if you think about content just as content of something to fill space, that's not the right way. What they did is, yes, they produced content, but they produced content with a heart and with a mind, with a purpose, with a mission, and with a myth that they built. And that's what brands as media means. You are letting people experience the power and the purpose of your brand right then and there, versus just claiming it. You're not going out there and saying like, listen, I'm standing for that, but you show it, you make it come alive in your actions. Words speak louder than, no, deeds speak louder than words. How do you say it? No, that's wrong. There's something wrong with that saying. Anyway, walk the talk rather than just talk it. We call it ideas that do. Ideas that do exactly for that reason, that they are communication ideas or engagement ideas, but that engage practically. They really let people interact with you, and they let people experience something about you, versus just you claiming something. So you do, and you don't just declare. We just talked about that brands must balance exclusion and inclusion, because it's the way to create communities with a shared mindset. So it's, and this is important when it comes to Ueber-Brands, because they need to have this idea of us versus them. It's crucial for them to still always have a little bit of something where you separate yourself from. If everybody is a follower of something, then the brand loses its special appeal. It loses its aspiration. You always can only be for something if there's people that are against it as well. And so that's where this whole idea of balancing exclusion and inclusion is coming from. So you need to create this communities. You still need to feel like an insider, part of something that not everybody's a part of. And for that, brands have become really their own medium or their own media, because that's the best way to really, they basically preach the gospel and people come into the church. And in this case, example, the church was really the King Arthur's baking show, for instance. As we said, yes, what you do is important, but how you do it is almost even more important. Style matters. Here's an example of a brand that fell on its face and learned that lesson dearly.
Okay, you ready?
Yes.
Now.
A Peloton? Give it up for our first time ride. All right, first ride. I'm a little nervous, but excited. Let's do this. 5 days in a row. You surprised? I am. 6 a.m. Yay.
Rising with the sun.
That was totally worth it.
Let's go race in Boston, 50 ride.
She just said my name. A year ago, I didn't realize how much this would change me. Thank you.
This holiday, give the gift of Peloton.
This was last holiday. This year's holiday campaign is much better, much better. This last year, I don't know if like some of you may remember, it created a ruckus because people were outraged about the depiction of the woman, the wife, where the guy has the audacity of, number one, giving her a workout device, kind of like saying, well, I think it'd be good if you worked out a little bit because you're getting too chubby or something. But then she taking it on and gobbling it up and kind of like doing nothing else but trying to live up to her husband's expectations and turning her into the wife that he wants her to be. So it's really, I mean, to say the least, it's not of this day and age. It almost feels like a commercial out of the 50s in its style, and surprisingly so for a brand that otherwise is quite with it. And this year's campaign, of course, has gotten much better. So this got them a lot of flack, exactly for it, and it shows. Yes.
Yeah. One remark on this, because I keep running into this, particularly with mass merchandise brands, with very functionally rooted brands, with the classic CPG brands, which is, they discover that the benefit of Peloton is to make you fit, or even that people feel proud about working out and being fit, that they experience it as a transformational experience, let's say, and they then want to make these insights very clear through their advertising. So basically they reveal what it means to people because they've learned about it. And of course, nobody likes to have that mirror in front of them and see, I fell, for the beauty of this bike, for the idea of becoming, the slender, modern, not housekeeper, etc., etc. So that's what you need to refrain from, really, when you do these things, because again, we've said this before, it seems like it's going to burst the bubble if you do.
Yeah, you need to. Yes, you obviously you do want to talk about your benefits, but you have to find a way that's a little bit more intelligent and a little bit more advanced than residing to the 50s kind of like very blatant portrayals and stylistically. So what a lot of brands do is what we subsume under the idea of pride and provocation. They talk in a way to the mindset of the people that they're trying to reach. And that is not for everybody. And it's intentionally not for everybody, because an Ueber-Brand does not want to be for everybody. If they get like a 50% of the cake, that's a lot already. And they can very happily live with that. You very often, they only get 10% or less and still going to be happy with it. So the mindset's very different. You don't need to be understood or appreciated by every housewife on every corner of the globe. It's perfectly fine. And you can speak a language, or you can find a style that is a bit more sophisticated or a little bit more provocative. Like, for instance, in this case, Chaumet, a high-end French jewelry brand that talks about grâce et caractère, grace and character. I guess everybody speaks that much French, but it does so. So it in a way, it's exactly what JP was talking about. It is the perfect portrayal of the product. It's the product over there, but they just turn the model around. Now you can argue, they did that because they wanted to save the model fees and the buyouts. And perhaps that was an aspect, but it's a very smart way of doing it. But basically what it does, like, where would you ever see a woman from behind with a tiara on it? You wouldn't. Nobody would ever dare doing something like that, because the emotional connection is important. People want to see the beauty of the face and they connect with the eyes. And that's when your product starts shining. Otherwise, you might as well do a lay down and put it like somewhere on a floor, No, they did this intentionally and exactly because they wanted to provoke. with grace, and with character. Or an example that all of us know, Caperlink believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything. We all been through the story. We all know like what flag Nike got for it initially, but how eventually they triumphed, because there's the part of the population that really supports this idea, and that's those who are more supportive of Nike than ever. While of course there was another part that was dismissive. Oh, here is an example, very recent example, also very provocative, but see for yourself. Oops, where is it?
Which brand is this?
Well, you'll see. It's a, you'll see.
I'm going to show you how to use a menstrual cup, but if I do that here, it will be deleted.
So it's a female company. It's a company that produces menstrual cups, which are all the rage now. I had no idea they even existed until like a little while ago. But apparently they've been in, like, especially in developing countries forever. And now out of ecological reasons, sustainability reasons, a lot of women are looking for ways to, rather than throwing tampons away and stuff, to find other ways of dealing with their periods. And so they're looking for menstrual cups. And this is like all the rage apparently now, as far as I heard. But nobody really knows how to deal with them. And so they come up with this idea of creating a tutorial basically on how to use a menstrual cup. And since it's obviously graphic, they needed to put it on Pornhub. So it's a very different, it's the polar opposite of what Chaumet did, which is elevating themselves by taking a very sophisticated approach, doing away with all the traditions and expectations of like looking in the face of a lovely girl with beautiful jewelry. Here they go to the other extreme and talking to a young urban kind of mindset that has no issues with pornography. They might not be the biggest followers of Pornhub, but they don't have moral issues with it or anything. So, but they actually, and they like the idea of getting educated on a way of dealing with their period in a way that's more sustainable. The other thing that you often see is that there's a different kind of endorsement that takes place when it comes to Ueber-Brands. So they still employ celebrities, actually more than ever, but they do it in a slightly different way. I think most of us, or a lot of us, have seen the whole thing about Heinz and Ed Sheeran's Heinz tattoo that he had way before. And then, of course, someone found out about it, and Heinz, of course, jumped on it and turned that into a special edition bottle. And then eventually it ended with this year's Super Bowl.
I've got an idea for a Heinz ketchup commercial. I was at this super posh restaurant, super posh. The type of place that has chandeliers and paintings on the wall and way too many forks. I think classical music was playing, but maybe it was jazz. No, definitely classical. The hostess walks up to me and she says, "Mr. Sheeran, is this your first time dining with us?" And I say, "Yep." The waiter comes over, he's telling me about the specials. Super fancy vegetables, fancy sauces. I said, "Sounds fancy." So fast forward and the food comes. The waiter goes on to tell me, "We are proud to present this farm-to-table blah, 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 posh and fancy blah, 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 with a side of blah, blah, blah." You know, the food looked good. I just thought there was something missing. So I reach into my bag and I take out the only thing that can complete me. And at that point, the whole world came to a stop. In the waiter was screaming through his eyes. So that's my idea. Do you want to do it?
So you'll see he stars in a commercial. He almost, well, this was obviously a joke, but he almost pretends that he loves the brand so much that he came up with a commercial idea for it. So he makes him, he obviously is a fan of the brand. He was way before, because who else would tattoo a brand on his arm? But it's a fun way of dealing with it, and plus it's a way of elevating your brand while at the same time knocking the whole idea of exclusivity and the whole poshy kind of traditional luxury idea, which is funnily enough the same that happens in this other commercial that also aired first during this year's Super Bowl.
John,
Watch for
why
yourself.
did you
It's
bring
called
me
the
here?
I think it's time
Goodbye
we
to
throw
Old
old
Luxury.
luxury and go on away party.
Can I have everyone's attention, please? Excuse me, guy who thinks his loud suits a personality. Woman who claims she hasn't had any plastic surgery. I saw you in the waiting room. And you, lady who goes to Asia once and suddenly thinks she's spiritual. Guy who leans on everybody for some reason. To old luxury. You had a good run, but now it's time to zhuzh you up a little bit. I give you young luxury. John! Where were you? It was supposed to be a thing, and you made it not a thing.
What's the magic word?
Sexiest man alive.
Okay, introducing the GV80, the first ever SUV from Genesis. Somebody had to make luxury fun.
Who better than us, baby?
So you see there's, and that's exactly what it is. What we're talking about earlier, this idea of inclusion and exclusion. You play with traditional notions of scarcity, exclusivity, refinedness, and refinement, but you make fun of them, and thus positioning yourself as a inclusive, exclusive kind of like approach to and thus elevating yourself. And you use your celebrity partners, you make them part of a story that obviously takes them as the characters that they're known for, like Chrissy Teigen, for instance, playing with, giving him a hard time, or him being known, like John Legend being known as the sexiest man alive. So you pick up those parts that are very prevalent in social media, and you play with them in your commercial, while at the same time kind of making your brand a natural part of their life, versus just them holding up and saying like, oh, this, I've driven this brand and it was like a great car in it, and so forth and so forth. So it's an eye-to-eye connection between celebrity and brand, where both help each other. And it never appears that just one's light is shining on the other. It's not the idea of this brand needs to borrow interest from John Legend and Chrissy Teigen. It's just an interesting story to tell where both benefit from. Art apart, yeah. Oh, JP, you're frozen. I don't know. You want to say something?
Just a quick question because, yeah. So just a quick question because the video also was frozen and we couldn't see what the brand actually is. But my question to you is the fact that this brand, and I think it's this upcoming Chinese want-to-be luxury brand, similar to what Lexus did
Genesis,
from
yeah.
Japan in old times. Is that really, aren't a lot of the consumers literate enough nowadays in advertising to know that when an advertising says, I'm the new luxury, that is pretend? They should try and be new luxury rather than say they are. How do we need to think about that?
Yeah, of course, but they do it with so much wink and so much self-irony, that they get away with it. And this is obviously an intro commercial, you know? So from now on, they need to spell it out, but they want to position themselves, hey, we're luxury, but in a new and a different way. But they did it, fortunately, with a lot of like irony and humor that I think they can get away with it. If they really become a brand,
right.
And I thought I just wanted to show that because I think it's an interesting commercial, because it really shows the new connection between celebrity and brand, but also it shows how you employ the personalities in all their dimensions that are, so that it ties immediately into the social media, the role that they're playing, as well as the other roles that they're playing in their life, the professional ones.
Okay.
Art apart, I think, is the old way of doing things in a certain way. It's been around forever, like ever since the Medici. There's been a happy coupling between those with money and those with ideas or talent. And that has been going on forever, and it's like obviously something that I don't think we need to talk much. Everybody knows, like lots of examples. Just think of what Louis Vuitton has done with Murakami, or Kusama, or Jill Sander did with Wenders, or like there's so many examples. BMW, art cars. You very often Prada Museum, Fondazione Prada. I mean, there's lots of examples of brands either sponsoring or supporting art. But what's interesting is that they now also stylize themselves, or in an artistic way, like for instance Aesop does, which the whole corporate identity of the brand is very stylized. It's well designed, to say the least, over designed, some would say. There's nothing left to chance. That's the brand. You know, when you come into the store, everything is very much laid out in a very specific way, almost pedantic. Like for instance, where you have like only uneven number of products always on the shelf. You never have going to find even products. Never mind that they are all spaced in a very particular manner, etc., etc. So obviously, someone who's very anal about everything, which reflects also on the product quality. Hopefully, they're just as anal about the ingredients and everything. But they go even one step further, where they turn their stores into art spaces, either for installations, like in this case, from artists, or for lectures, or for poet readings, or for vernissages, whatever it is. They really want their stores in a very local manner, by the way. So they always try to pick up of the local art scene and the local style and zeitgeist. But they really want their stores to become little, almost community centers where you can meet, and where those that are artistically or aesthetically at least inclined go. Here you see like a bunch of different stores, and you see already to what
extent they go.
I'm sorry?
I said you see to which extent they go in their collaborations, in their expression of this kind of modern monastic spirit, etc. It's also contrasting to your point earlier about being different. It is, of course, contrasting with all the flashy, glamorous, or social media glossier kind of competition. This is a one-off in terms of, as a brand, it's unique.
Yeah, not everybody can do this, and it works because they have these apothecary bottles, and so the idea of repetition makes sense because they are this like stripped down, almost early day industrial kind of look. They're almost designless, and this is like Uber design with the undesigned, and it really creates this nice tension, and that's very, very zeitgeisty and very much talks to people that are design and aesthetically inclined, aficionados, or interested. And so it fits perfectly with their Uber target. Wouldn't work with, like a lot of other targets wouldn't even appreciate this.
Yeah, the enemy maybe of that is once it feels repetitive. So it reminds me of Kiehl's, for example, you know, taking that East Village store, very, very successful for over a decade, in stamping that out literally across the world with Mr. Bones, with the Harley Davidsons and so on. But obviously after a time, if there's nothing else you can add, if you cannot evolve this DNA and this expression, starting to get really boring because repetitive, right?
When I remember when L'Oreal bought them and they started rolling out, they initially did it in a way where they had that certain iconic elements like Mr. Bones and whatever, but then they kind of gave them always a mix or wrap that kind of connected to wherever they are. So it didn't look the same in Shanghai as it did in New York or in Madrid or whatever, you know. Lately, and I guess it just became too much work for them. So they dropped that. So now it almost feels like you can walk into a Uniqlo and it's the same fucking Uniqlo or Gap, you know, it's the same wherever you go in the world.
Right.
And I think those days are over. Nobody wants that anymore. You know, I remember like way back when Prada started these lime green kind of like stores. And then eventually they found out like it was it really becomes like McDonald's, you know, like what's the most beautiful thing about Moscow? What's the most beautiful thing? It was always the Prada store and it always looked the same. And so this is like, it's almost like an 80s, no 90s mindset. I don't know why L'Oreal is doing that. It's probably just economies. Here, I think it works that because this is very studied, and the studiedness of it, while still adapting to the space and to the environment and using elements, but this is the studiedness needs an exaggerate amount of control, and that's what makes it fun, you know. But still, it always looks different in its sameness. Ultimately, as we said going in, this is all about unselling, finding a way, and we talked about this in the first place, of creating the story, the myth that kind of wraps your sales pitch into a story that is bigger and thus elevates your product and your brand to a higher level of being. And that's really what it is ultimately all about. Literally unselling, though, means that you ask people to not buy, and Patagonia actually did exactly that a while ago. And a lot of people have kind of followed suit, not in this extreme way, but in other ways where they are making the point that it is not about quantity, but it is about quality, particularly in today's sustainable world. The ultimate point is that when it comes to the communication of Ueber-Brands, you need to be careful to not be too blatant in selling. So as JP was saying when we talked about Peloton, yes, a lot of mass brands will come and say, oh yeah, but we need to show the benefit, the functional benefit, and how it turns into an emotional benefit and into an experiential benefit. And this is the insight. And women like, yes, and we can make it a bit human by saying like, oh, Gianna, of course she doesn't want to wake up at 6 a.m. in the morning. So that makes it a little fun, no? But ultimately we're going to show the what Peloton does for you and how it really gets you into this routine and how it is fun and how what a great Christmas gift it is, you know. But when you do it that way, it becomes so obvious that all the fun's gone, and you certainly don't win those that are a little bit smarter, a little bit more sophisticated in this world, and those are the ones that you want with an Uber brand. Coco Chanel or Gabrielle Chanel said it best when she said superlatives take you down. So just thinking, chest beating yourself, talking about how great you are, what great things you can do, is actually the quickest way to make you the laughing stock. Just look at Trump, for instance. So the best way to go up is to be a bit quieter, a little bit about more self-reflected, going deeper, more truthful, talk about the values that you hold, turn them into a story that you talks about those values, talks about your brand and what you want to stand for, and then live up to it inside out, and communicate in a way where you prove the values that you want to stand for, rather than just claiming them. Make people experience them, the difference that you want to make and that you are making. So in short, in summary, prestige brands are about aspiration, and that's why style is so important. It is always about us versus them. You need to build up something that you can aspire to, that is different from what most people do. And for that, the how is crucial. Unselling is always much more sexy, because then it's about seduction. Selling. It's everybody knows that. If you come into a room and you say like, "Hi, I'm the greatest guy. Do you want to spend the night with me?" People are going to laugh at you. But if you do it in a more seductive way, where you just prove what a great guy you are, chances are you may be lucky. Attitude, in this sense, is a must, and arrogance isn't something to necessarily shy away from, because there's very often like, oh yeah, but we can't alienate, we can't be too arrogant. You can be a little bit arrogant if it is substantiated with authority. If there is a reason to have a certain arrogance, but better yet, have a certain provocative mindset and be truthful. Don't hide. Endorsements are following the same rule. They are more eye to eye than in traditional FMCG contexts, where it's still very often the brand trying to borrow some interest or some glamour from the celebrity and their usage. In this case, they're really partners eye to eye, where the brand never puts itself in the need of a higher celebrity in order to be glamorous. The brand is glamorous in and of itself. And artification, or connecting with the arts, or whatever is an artistic kind of context, which Aesop does, always works, has always worked, and because it does literally counterbalance the vulgarity of selling. It makes selling a bit more fun, and it puts it up, levels it up to a cultural level. So just like a gallery, they just as well sell, but it feels more like a museum. And that's a cultural value and not just a sales point. So to sum it all up, all together, what does this mean? It means that we need to create a mythical story at the top that kind of drives us and our brand in everything that we do. And then we unfold that to the outside world, let this story and this ideal that we create for ourselves truthfully. But we can be a little bit, let's say, creative in the way we tell the story. It doesn't need to be 100% true. We can't lie. There can't be a blatant lie which stands which contradicts like the realities that we are. But we don't have to talk about every aspect of ourselves that may be true but not in line with the story. So we have this myth. This myth guides us, and we live it in everything that we do, and then we communicate it out. And you'll see a great example of this is still, and the best is still the greatest, is Apple, which started all with this story that probably none of you remember, if you've ever even seen it, probably never saw it. It was a commercial that they ran 1984 with the launch of their first Macintosh computer.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the information purification victims. Created for the first time in all history, a garden of pure ideology where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests of a contradictory influence. Of course, is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our hands shall talk themselves to death, and we will rile them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
So this is really a mythical story, if ever there was one. I mean, I don't know, most people of you may have read George Orwell's 1984 in school. I don't know if they still read it or not. But anyway, it's the story of oppression and of someone rebelling against this oppression, breaking through. It's David against Goliath, basically. And that's exactly the situation that Apple was in then. And that was the story that Steve Jobs kind of fostered, of the garage and everything. And so they took this and really executed this on a very mythical level, literally. But it was true. It was true exactly what they were standing for. They were ganging up against the big blue at that time, which was IBM. But the interesting thing is that today, while they've become the highest valued brand in the world, so certainly not the David against the Goliath anymore, but the Goliath himself, they still maintain that spirit. Apple still has this challenger brand spirit, although they're hardly a challenger brand themselves anymore. And that is because they took that myth, but then they translated that myth into a very clear purpose or mission, which they executed then a bit later into this great manifesto film about thinking different. Oops.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
That last part is not part of the original film.
No, it's not. But it's funny that it is in there because it shows exactly what they did. They turned their own situation, which they communicated 1984, with 1984, where they were the challenger, the rabble against the big oppressive blue by IBM. And Steve Jobs was the crazy one that thinks different. And everybody said, like, you're crazy, it doesn't work. But then they turned this experience and the behavior of themselves into an attitude of their Uber target. So they actually, this is an ode to all those people that are the crazy ones, that are the ones that are thinking to do differently. And that's how they won over their Uber target, which is the creative, what's nowadays called the creative class. That's how they became the computer for those imaginative, creative people. And thus became the chicer one, the more aspirational one, the one that's not for the workhorses, but for those that are imaginative and creative and changing the world. And the interesting thing is, those commercials ran quite a while ago, like the first one, even almost 40 years ago. And most people haven't seen it. There's a whole new generations that they don't even know those commercials existed. And yet the spirit still drives them. And that's the essence. You don't need to show this commercial again and again and again. Everybody wants to can see it on the internet, but most people don't. Most people have no idea that they ever existed, but they feel that attitude and they feel that myth in everything that they do, because again, it first and foremost inspires your actions, your behavior inside out. It's not so much a story to tell, it's a story to live. And that's what Apple does in everything that they do. This is an overview, and I'm just going to click you quickly through it, but they translated it into cultural principles. They translated into a tonality where the way they talk to people, which is very human, very, again, eye to eye, very not salesy, not advertising-y, but just like real people talk. They turned it into a design language, which is very ergonometric. It's very concerned with, it's focused on the people, and the people, as they at one point said, it's computers for the rest of us, for those that are not tech geeks, that don't like to have some complicated kind of thing. They want it easy. They want it human. They want it beautiful. They turned their points of sale much more into community centers, together with a Genius Bar where you can get support and help. Everything that, like, things that have happened along now in lots of other stores, but they were the first to do that, you know, that they literally, they don't have their own shelves, or, I mean, they still have shelves somewhere, but at the end of the day, it's somewhere you go to experience things, to try things out, to get help, to talk about computers, to experience the products, etc.
But importantly, Wolfgang, I think also their interpretation of community. There's obviously a ton of ways you can do this. Think of, you know, le pain quotidien or something like that, you know, homey, warm, hearth, etc. This is their interpretation of community. It fits with the creative, sophisticated kind of community mindset, etc. There are some people, again, to the point of some people are out. There are some people who will stick out like a sore thumb in this environment, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. But also, yes, there's lots of, like, every brand nowadays, every flagship store has a cafe area nowadays to kind of become a community center. But that's now, you know, they started this way back. I mean, I remember when Apple opened their first flagship in Soho, people were thinking they're crazy because the whole idea of verticalization wasn't there yet. You know, it was the first time someone was daring to go outside of the specialty stores and building his own store. And everybody was saying, you're crazy. Every retailer is going to drop you, and if you're selling directly to consumers. Of course, now 20 years later, or like 25 years later, this has become totally normal, you know, because everywhere is direct to consumer, online and offline. And still there's retailers, although less and less. But so they really were revolutionary in everything that they do. Also the design, the sparsity, you know, this again, like almost like a monastic kind of, it's the temple to computers. It's such a waste of space. Every other retailer would have a heart attack and say, like, well, we have to make much more use of that space. Or the headquarter eventually, you know, all the way back to the headquarter, which is very different from every other headquarter, and imbues or represents the values that they want to hold, this idea of connectivity and connectedness, and also the circle as the perfect shape, all the way to selling. And they do sell. But they sell, and this, if I'm going to show this, you have to watch this at one point. It was like a campaign about Mac against PC, and obviously, these two guys are the manifestations of Mac and PC, and it's easy to see which one was the Mac and which one's the PC, and which one does is sexier and more interesting and more aspirational versus the other, which is but watch them. It's really, really funny. And so you can have direct sales pitches, but if you have them within your myth and within your mission, so you have your own style of doing it, they're not really sales pitches anymore. They're manifestations of your myth that are a bit more functional, let's say. And of course, ultimately, everything they do thus becomes engaging because they have one guiding thought. And this is, we want to support the creative ones, the crazy ones, the ones that are thinking. So it leads to something that is ultimately the most important, and that's coherence, not consistency. Because consistency means you make everything the same. That's not the point. Everything follows the same logic, everything follows the same story, everything follows the same style, but everything is always surprising again and again and again. Never completely consistent, always having a little surprising yourself element in there, but being highly coherent. I think, and there's still no better example than Apple over the years. And obviously it's still the most successful brand in the world. So brands, they must find their myth, because the myth then functions as a meta story. And again and again, that meta story is not so much the story just for your communications. Yes, that too, but it's first and foremost the story that drives all your actions, including the communication, uniting all action inside out. It enables change as well as coherence, because once you know what you want to stand for, once you have your story, you're not afraid to change anymore, because you're going to be also truthful, always truthful, because you're following your convictions. And then when you change, you still follow your convictions, but you're going to portray them in a surprising new way. And this way, the brand myth, and that's why it's so important these days, in this age of a plethora of communication channels, constantly changing environments, pressure on everybody, and people having an attention span of a nanosecond. It's important that all those millions of impressions that are there for a nanosecond, they kind of connect and they add up to something bigger, and they don't just become a confusing deluge of information or communication, but that there's something that kind of connects all the dots, and that can ultimately nudge people to have a bit more of a positive bias towards your brand. That's because that's ultimately why we're doing all of this, to build people's bias towards our brand. It ultimately helps you to break it down to one of my favorite quotes from Janis Joplin: "Don't compromise yourself, you're all you've got." That's true for every one of us. And it certainly is true for Ueber-Brands today, because Ueber-Brands are nothing if they follow others. They have to work for the markets to follow them. That's what makes them Uber, that they're leaders and they build aspiration around that leadership. That's it. Thank you very much.
Wow. All right, everyone. There's a ton to unpack. As I said, I'll post the videos. You can look at those. I hope you gave yourself a bit of time to look through these videos, made some notes. We're going to discuss a few of these things in class. Unfortunately, this is not a live event. I know there would be a ton of questions.
Live on tape.
Thanks, Wolfgang, for that. Maybe to end us off here and representing the class, two observations / question actually in the end to you. So, myth is probably one of the more unusual subjects to talk about in a marketing class, in a marketing department, even in a brand strategy class. And some people will say it's very removed kind of from the practical brand building. But people, I just reread Sapiens by Yuval Harari, and I noticed actually how he says the key differentiator between humans and other animals is this cognitive revolution, as he calls it, where humans have learned somehow, we don't know how, it's mythical, no pun intended, to create vision and to create myth and to follow that myth, something that doesn't exist, that is somewhere in the future, a dream, and follow it. So it seems to be associated with the most human of attributes, maybe the attribute that separates us from animals. And on the other hand, you will have people, and I know a lot of students also, who will say, what is it all worth when the future looks like programmatic marketing, in fact, looks like Amazon, looks like an Amazon knowing you need something before you even know you need it. And by the time that need comes up, it's not only in front of the door, because in the future it will already have been put into your fridge, or your bed will have been draped with it. If that is the future of commerce and of products, what's the need for myth? What do you say to that? Is it going to be ever more niche, or might there be another revolution, a cognitive revolution that brings it back?
But you're talking on two levels. We're talking on brand level here. The other thing talks on product level. On product, on practical level, obviously things will become more and more practical, more servicing in a way. But that doesn't fulfill the cultural needs that we have, what makes us human. They fill our physical needs, our functional needs, our physiological needs. They put food in the fridge, or they put clothes on our bodies, or whatever it is. But they don't fulfill our cultural needs, our brain, our identities, our needs as humans. And for that, we need brands more and more, because brands and the whole idea of commerce or economy, the economic system has taken over the society as a whole. Previously, the economic system was like part next to the judicial system, next to the religious system, next to any other system in society with their values. All those have been pushed aside, and brands have taken over a much higher function. And in order to live up to that, they need to also take on the mythical aspects of that have been supplanted and had been lived by others before. So I think, yes, it becomes more practical on a functional level, but brands, which is what we're talking about, which is the wrapping around a product, around the function, needs to become more, well, some would call it esoteric. I would just call it cultural, emotionally and spiritually fulfilling or inspiring.
So the brands need to gain the strength that you actually fight the Amazon algorithm and says, no, I do not want Amazon Prime flour. I want King Arthur.
I want, but see, I think Amazon. I mean, I'm probably one of the few. Everybody's like so happy with Amazon and how their stock is doing, and thinks like Amazon is the greatest. And yes, Amazon is the greatest. They're doing a great job logistically. Amazon sucks as a brand. There's no emotional connection with it. Everybody loves to hate Amazon, but they use it because it's very functionally subservient and it works. But the moment there is another Amazon coming that does just as well, but has a story and a spirit that I can embrace, people will drive over in droves, like switch in droves. So Amazon works as long as they're singular and they corner the market, just like IBM was the unchallenged leader for a long time. And when it came to computer, that was the Amazon of the time. And then came a little diddled Apple, and Apple took over. And that same may happen with Amazon one day.
Excellent. And Apple, as we've heard, won through the strength of a myth. At least it was part of it. I'm glad we opened that Pandora box. It'll give us a lot to talk about in class as well. With that, again, thanks, Wolfgang. Over to Berlin. Actually, a storm passed.
It's night here.
Look, while this was going on, a storm passed. And that is probably why the connection was very iffy from time to time.
And now it's better again, no?
Yeah, sorry about that. Of course, in the end, it's always better. But I know in the beginning, in particular, there were some shaky times there, but things have calmed down. So thanks again, Wolfgang, and hopefully we'll have a live session sometime in the future again. But for now, I think this was a great way and not a compromise. You gave us all you've got. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, JP. It was a pleasure being there. Thanks, everybody.